This is the introduction to part 1 of Visions of the 21st Century, where we deal with the expanding fields of knowledge, especially the modern and alternative worldviews. Consciousness only has a limited view of the external world, since almost all specialisms and disciplines can only see the world from their narrow point of view. A systems approach which considers the wider fields of knowledge is urgently required. The fields of knowledge are analogous to the expanding and accelerating universe. We can ask some basic philosophical questions such as, are these knowledge fields of a materialistic or idealist orientation? Behind this is the modern worldview, which underpins the materialist point of view, while the alternative worldview underpins the idealist or more spiritual point of view. With this methodology, we begin to examine various fields of knowledge, beginning with physics, which traditionally has been the great destroyer of the spiritualist position, yet in the 20th and 21st centuries is edging towards a new paradigm for the origins of the cosmos that resembles a new creation myth. I hope you find the following reflections of interest.
Okay, think of the parable of the 5 blind men, the famous Hindu parable, and the elephant. Think of the elephant as some symbol. It could be a symbol of the self. Jungians often interpret it that way. For the Hindus, it would be a symbol of Brahman, of the field of knowledge, perhaps we could think of it. Some huge area which we blindly touch some part of and try and figure out what it is. It's a useful parable because, as we know, from psychology and from philosophy, the world of our consciousness is in some sense blind. It only has limited access to the real, so-called real world, doesn't it? It's a limited antenna. Even our senses are limited, and our senses are major feeders for the brain. And so therefore, the idea that somehow we're touching different parts of a vast field is a parable that's made sense across the ages. As I was going over half a dozen or a dozen of them in the last week or two, I tried to think of what it felt like to be looking at these fields of knowledge like history and economics and physics and chemistry and life sciences and systems theory, and the list went on, and the things we've looked at. And indeed, many of these things are covered in that wonderful book, Systems View of Life by Capra, which covers so many disciplines. It's just amazing what he's done. And it seemed to me they were like fractals or kaleidoscopes and some changing multiplicitous system, and which somehow just went on forever. And indeed, that is how I phrased it in The Sower and the Seed in the opening chapter, where so it's only 4 or 5 paragraphs opening chapter, and the last paragraph basically is about some telescope, which is our consciousness, pointed to the starry sky, to a universe which is always expanding beyond our range. So this is like also a symbol for our knowledge system, our consciousness, which is looking at an expanding world of knowledge, an expanding universe, which is indeed not just expanding but accelerating, isn't it? But that's like knowledge. Knowledge is accelerating, and it's infinite. It's not that we're going to find the ultimate theory of everything. These are nice words to hear and sell a lot of books, but in fact, all we come up against is an edge of more mystery. And if you think of physics, that's been totally the case. The astounding discoveries of physics, but then come up against the enormous mystery of string theory and black holes and so on. We've just gone into other universes and other dimensions and other cosmi and forces that we scarcely can comprehend. And that's been the result of 150 years of advanced physics making tremendous progress. So it seems as if our telescope, our consciousness, looks out into the cosmos to something which is always expanding ultimately beyond us, no matter what advances we make. And that we always see some reflection somehow of ourselves, that consciousness is seeing itself. We're looking at the Big Bang, or we're looking at the supposed Big Bang, or we're looking at the origins of things. We push back to the origins, but ultimately consciousness is looking at itself, or looking at its creator, or looking at some vast intelligence which it is part of or co-creationist with, and so therefore it requires not just knowledge and seeing things outside of one, but looking inside of one and uniting the contemplative disciplines, the inner knowledge, with what is going on outside in terms of our knowledge systems. To get some quick hold upon these knowledge systems, you might think of them as being powered or fueled by various methods. The first method, of course, is the scientific method, which has been around since the Western Enlightenment. Enlightenment is a double-edged word. In the West, it means the scientific enlightenment of knowledge beginning with the 16th, 17th century. And in the East, of course, enlightenment is an inner state of vast intuition and integration, and is ultimately a spiritual state. So very different views of enlightenment. The scientific method which emerged from the Western Enlightenment is a certain set of principles, philosophy, which underlies all of the knowledge virtually that is being gained. That is, it uses the scientific method. I'll just call that SM, the scientific method by which things are looked at objectively, they're broken down analytically, hypotheses are made, inductions are made as opposed to deductions, so it's an inductive logic. Inductive means that you draw from the evidence in front of you the induction, the hypothesis that you want to test. Deduction means that you have a certain knowledge system in your head and you deduce from that the hypothesis that should result from, it could be a dogma, it could be a religion, it could be just simply a paradigm that you believe exists, and therefore you make a deduction from it. But genuine science is inductive. It's willing to change its principles, it's willing to change its paradigms, as indeed we see in modern physics. Modern physics is inductive, isn't it? It's willing to change its view of the universe, the cosmos, and the role of the observer. The very nature of science changes under the impact of the new knowledge which is discovered in physics, like subatomic particles, the unity of the observer with what is being observed. So physics has changed, and this scientific method is a paradigm, of course, the queen of the sciences. Behind that, you can think of the modern worldview, which I refer to as MWV, and the modern worldview is basically a wider set of philosophical principles which underpins the scientific method. And the modern worldview states that the human consciousness is the height of evolution. It is evolved by accident. The universe is essentially dead and has produced life by accident, by random mutation. Life has developed, and the right of human consciousness and its center point, the ego, is to dominate this world and to have mastery over it and to use it as it sees fit. It's a very exploitative, it's a very dominating view, the modern worldview. The alternate worldview we can see emerging in the new metaphysics, and that was really informing the reference I sent you, Mind Before Matter, that book, and I gave you a small summary of it, and in which there are various authors, including Anne Baring actually. And the alternative worldview is very different. It states a different set of principles, which we'll look at in a moment, but essentially they are at the opposite end of the spectrum from the modern worldview. And another simple philosophical guiding point through this system of knowledge is the first year philosophy course where the student learns about various things, including idealism and materialism. Remember, I learned that in my first term of philosophy. And idealism is when you view the world or you view the mind, consciousness as an ideal, as it's been produced by a god or produced by some intelligence, which is non-material. But idealism, Hegel, for example, is usually classified as an idealist. That is, he looks at history and says that there's some spirit running throughout history, isn't there? Materialism is a view which says, well, no, the opposite is the case, that material values, material forces, analytic intelligence, dead matter, which has to be understood in terms of its forces, its physics, or indeed in social terms, in terms of class struggle, material factors which can be looked at as concrete, relationships in human beings or concrete material things in the world constitute the view of materialism. The fields that we could look at and say, well, how are these fields of knowledge doing in the 21st century in terms of these simple ideas which we put forward, like idealism and materialism? Are they idealistic or materialistic? Is there a movement in these fields towards the alternative worldview, which tends to be more spiritual, more process orientated, more systems orientated, sees things as a whole, sees human beings as part of that whole? Or are they dominated by the materialist worldview and the scientific method, which tends to be more analytic and materialist? Where in that spectrum do they lie? Yep. And if we're looking at half a dozen or so of these fields of knowledge, and I made some, as it were, quick judgments on them, I had to say that the materialist worldview has dominated not only the 18th and 19th century, but also the 20th and 21st century, and is likely to continue. That no matter what discipline you go into, that the materialist worldview and the scientific method is the dominant one. It's the one that's taught in universities, it's the one that's taught in institutions across the world, and even in those fields where you think most need some alternative worldview, like economics, a field I know quite well. Well, you know, no matter what crisis we've gone through, the 2008 crisis, the ecological crisis, economics courses are still taught across the world broadly in the same way. They're still taught in the same principles as they were 40, 50, 100 years ago. It's amazing. And then when I was a teacher, I tried to introduce a course on crisis economics and economics of ecology. And basically it was just voted out, and no, we need macroeconomics, we need microeconomics, we need business economics. This is what students are looking for, and these alternative things are not relevant. You know, blind man touching the elephant. No view of, you know, even the wider field around one. It was just simply, this is our field, and this is what advances our field. So this is, even in those fields which need it most, I think my honest assessment is that the materialist worldview is totally dominant, not very dominant, and only one or two fields have incorporated alternative worldviews to some extent. Strangely enough, the queen of the science, above all, precisely where the great destroyer has, physics being the great destroyer of religion, right? These have been the fields that have actually surprised us the most, well, particularly physics, because in the world of physics we have come out with this different reality, the subatomic field, and the field of relativity theory has shown us that really our conscious dimension is only the middle sphere. It's what the human beings believe to be their reality. But it doesn't correspond to the reality that surrounds us or is above us in the macro field of relativity theory, or in the subatomic field, in the micro fields, which constitute everything below our field of vision, so to speak. So this has been the most surprising, and string theory has been now around, does it belong in the materialist worldview or the alternative view? It's been around since the 1970s. Holographic analysis has been around since the 1980s. So string theory has actually come out with these amazing ideas that there's actually infinite number of universes, as if our universe was not big enough. They have now proposed that string theory that there's infinite numbers of universe, and they find it very difficult to find evidence for it, but they still keep this up as a big theory. Holograms has been around now for some time, but it hasn't gone away, and more and more physicists are looking at string theory and becoming interested in it, and also ideas of black holes and holograms, and coming out with ideas which really belong in the world. You think of metaphysics rather than physics. Meta means above, doesn't it? So the metaphysics, the world of religion and the world of some superordinate reality, metaphysics, above the world, above physics. And they seem to be like metaphysicians rather than physicists. And their ideas have totally turned our normal ideas of reality on its head. And as Capra said in 1975, in his very original first book, he said that it's very like Eastern mysticism. Mystics of the East correspond their views of so-called reality to the world of physics and quantum physics. That seems to have grown. That seems to be gaining more apace. And now physicists in the last 10 years are contemplating something that they never contemplated before. Up to 10 years ago, every physicist more or less said, mathematician, we can't look past the Big Bang, right? 13.8 billion years ago, there's a Big Bang, we can prove it, there's all this evidence, and the evidence is good. But we can't go beyond that because the laws of physics break down. You can't make any sense of it. Now, a great number of physicists, I wouldn't say the majority, but a great number think of something that preceded the Big Bang. And they're beginning to construct mathematical models, which is the only thing that makes sense to them, which give them some kind of idea of what may have led towards the Big Bang. Of course, it's not going to be a mystery to people that there must have been a big contraction before the big expansion. It's a very simple piece of mechanical logic, and indeed it's the one that I adopted in Sowing the Seed, and is in Hindu mythology. The contractions and expansions of the breath of the Brahman, of the universe, correspond to the expansion and contractions of the universes across the ages, across infinity. It's a wonderful idea. They came out with it thousands of years ago, and I think physics is edging towards that. And in string theory, they've even made this even more remarkable by suggesting that the contraction that may have existed before the current expansion, the Big Bang, was what we see in front of us regularly in terms of black holes. The black holes of the universe, which now we know right across the universe, and certainly in the centre of every galaxy, aren't they? That they swallow matter, but then what happens to it? Well, physicists, you say, we don't know what happens to it. You can't say that, it's an invalid question. Now they're suggesting that this matter, vast amounts of matter in the cosmos, are swallowed by the black holes, destroying the previous universe, and then spewing it out and creating a new universe. So our universe is a result of a black hole. We're looking at ourselves when we look back at 13.8 million years ago, taking our consciousness out to that far. We're looking at the black hole spewing out what came in before. We are that. So this got really weird, hasn't it? It's got really weird and very exciting and very interesting. And you can't help but think metaphysically at this point, can you? They've stretched the metaphysics. Even the Hindus must be amazed at this. But of course the Hindus will insist that they got there first on these things. They were thinking about these things many thousands of years ago. So physics is the grand exception. The alternative worldview has come out with some amazing things, and it's certainly worthwhile keeping up to date with the vast advances in this field.